How's it going, guys? I'm Justin. Welcome to Extension 18. Halloween has always been my favorite time of the year. You get to dress up as who or whatever you want to be. As you make your rounds around the neighborhood, getting free candy. It's pretty awesome. But in the world of Extension 18, tricks and treats are only the beginning of something truly insidious. As always, make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to click that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our newest content. Pranksters. Halloween had always been a special time for Tyler. He loved that he could dress up and get free candy as he roamed the city at night. But those days were behind him. He was too old to dress up now. Tyler was now 13 and teenagers don't trick or treat, or at least that's what his friend Jimmy told him. His friends claimed that even though they won't be dressing up and celebrating Halloween like they used to, this was going to be the best Halloween yet. It was time that they had a Halloween filled with debauchery. Tyler was skeptical. He had never been the type of kid to like causing mischief and destroying another person's property, but he went along with his friends anyway. They were all supposed to meet in the park down the street from Tyler's house right after full dark. They had specific instructions to wear only black clothing and a mask of a blank white face. Tyler reluctantly told his parents that he was going to hang out with Jimmy and that they were going to watch some scary movies all night and eat Jimmy's little sister's candy. He hated lying to his parents, but they agreed to let him go. As Tyler rode his bike towards his true destination, he was amazed at the lack of lights in the park. It was pitch black. Even the streetlights around the entrance to the park seemed to be turned off. A small pit of dread began to form in Tyler's stomach, but he continued on, knowing that his friends would never let him live it down if he chickened out now. Tyler's friends were typical teenage boys. They poked and prodded at each other, trying to humiliate one another all the time. They all picked on Tyler especially. He was so quick to blush and react to even the smallest joke or jab directed towards him. But they were his friends, and he stuck by them, no matter what terrible pranks they played. He pulled up to the bike rack and locked his bike to it. As he scanned around him, he began to hear a strange sound. It almost sounded like music. He was sure that the guys were just trying to freak him out, but the pit in his stomach began to grow. His friends always tried to scare him, maybe because it was so easy. Nevertheless, he wasn't going to let them scare him this time. So he called out to them, coaxing them to come forward. He waited a few seconds, expecting them to run up to him or say something to him at least. But his friends didn't show, and the music got a little louder. His heart began to beat faster when he heard a rustling sound in the bushes next to him. He was sure that one of the boys was going to jump out at any time, but what he saw chilled him to the bone. An unnaturally tall man slinked out of the bushes and sprinted towards Tyler. Before he had time to react, the man had hit him over the head with something heavy, and Tyler dropped like a sack of potatoes. When he came to, Tyler could see a bonfire in front of him. The light was blinding. His head ached where he'd been pummeled. He tried to move his hand to his head, but they were tied behind his back. As his vision had claimed to the light, Tyler looked around and could see people dancing around the bonfire, and others like him that were also tied up. As he began to stare at the person sitting next to him, he realized that it was Jimmy. It looked as though Jimmy had been hit harder than Tyler had, because a thin line of blood had run down his face. Tyler tried to rouse Jimmy, but the boy didn't move a muscle. Tyler was worried for his friend and began to watch his chest to see if he was breathing or not. When Jimmy's chest rose slowly, Tyler let out a sigh of relief. At least he knew Jimmy was alive. That's when he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. It was the unnaturally tall man coming towards him again. He wore a black cloak and held a big knife in his hand. Tyler began to protest and tried to back away from him, but the man ignored him. He grabbed Jimmy and pulled him by his shirt collar over towards the fire. As Tyler watched, the people that had been dancing around the flames stopped and formed a circle. They were all wearing the same dark cloaks and had begun chanting in a strange language. While they chanted, Jimmy began to wake up. Jimmy looked around panicked and saw Tyler sitting there. He tried to scream, but his gag stopped him from doing so. As he struggled to get free, the tall man raised his knife and plunged it deep down into Jimmy's chest.
Jimmy's eyes bulged as his face reddened before the man yanked the knife free. Blood gushed out of the wound as tears ran down Jimmy's face. Tyler began to cry. This couldn't be happening. The tall man let Jimmy's body drop to the ground as the group continued to chant. He then grabbed a goblet and lifted Jimmy's body up and placed it underneath the wound, catching some of his blood. As he dropped Jimmy's body again, he exclaimed a few words in the strange language. He then began to drink from the goblet. Tyler was going to be sick. He had just watched his best friend get murdered, and now the murderer was drinking Jimmy's blood? The gruesome sight made Tyler retch uncontrollably. When the group heard the sound of Tyler throwing up, the chanting stopped. They were all staring at him. They watched and waited for him to stop before they continued to chant. The tall man passed the goblet on to the next person, who then drank also. Tyler watched as everyone in the group drank Jimmy's blood. He tried to look away, but something compelled him to stare. As Tyler scanned the bonfire and the people in attendance, he noticed the tall man was staring back at him. He gave a start as the man began to approach. There was a smile on the man's face, teeth red with blood, Jimmy's blood. Tyler tried to free his hands, tried to get onto his feet to run, but he couldn't loosen his ties. When the tall man reached him, he yanked Tyler to his feet and dragged him closer to the bonfire. Tyler struggled, but it was no use. The tall man was way too strong. As they reached the edge of the circle of light emitted by the bonfire, Tyler knew he was dead. But at that last second, Tyler managed to get his hand free and hit the man in the stomach. To his surprise, the man let go of him and clutched his belly. The knife that was used to slay Jimmy was lying right in front of Tyler. He quickly picked it up and swung it with all of his might. The blade caught at the man's throat and ripped through his flesh. Tyler could feel the resistance and pushed harder. The man grasped at his neck as blood rushed out of him in waves. The group of dancers stopped chanting and began screaming and ran in all directions towards the darkness. Jimmy sat up, eyes wide with horror.
Oh my God, Tyler, what have you done?
Tyler was confused. He had just seen Jimmy die. Tyler peered down at the knife in his hand as blood dripped from the blade. He then stared as the tall man fell to the ground, clutching at his throat. The other people, who had looked like they were tied up next to where Tyler had been, rushed over toward the two boys. All his friends stared back at him in abject horror.
It was only a prank, Tyler!
Jimmy exclaimed, staring at the man on the ground.
We were just trying to scare you.
Right then, something snapped in Tyler's brain. This whole thing had been a prank. They faked Jimmy's death just to scare him. His fondness for his friends faded quickly and was replaced by sheer hatred. Tyler looked at each of his friends' faces, tears streaming down each one. He stopped on Jimmy's face. He had orchestrated this whole thing. Tyler now recognized the tall man as one of Jimmy's brother's friends.
Trick or treat,
Tyler said to Jimmy. Tyler gripped the knife harder and looked at his friends. A smile began to form as he lifted the knife to his mouth. Tyler began to lick the edge of the blade, slicing his tongue as he ran the knife across it. He was finished being their punching bag, done being the butt of every joke. His eyes flicked to Jimmy's face as he viciously plunged the knife into his chest. The other boys ran as Tyler let out a crazed laugh, just as Jimmy's life drained from his eyes. Tyler then whispered into his ear,
Treat.
Halloween hunger. Caroline was so excited for Halloween. It was the only day where she could be herself. The only day that she could truly be seen. She didn't have to hide who she really was. Every year she would shuffle out of her house at the last moments of dusk and walk the streets with all the screaming children and the amazing decorations. She loved seeing the little fairies, pumpkins, and ghouls that the children would dress up as. If she felt adventurous, she might even talk to someone. But most of the time, they would just return her pleasantries and pass by. Caroline had noticed that over the last decade or two, there were less children out on Halloween. They all chose to go to movies or designated areas to trick or treat. Some parents even thought it was a good idea to drive their children from house to house, or were so lazy that they would have their kids go door to door while they drove on the street.
Caroline had witnessed many incidents where children were almost run over by these numbskull parents. This year, she hoped it would be different, more like when she was a child, where the parents escorted their children to each door and let the older ones roam without them. She really wanted a revival of the old times. As the sun began to sink on All Hallows Eve, Caroline began to feel the tingling sensation of excitement. Just as the last ray of sunshine kissed the sky, Caroline walked out the front door. She was elated when she saw the young children running through the streets. Maybe it was going to be different this year. She walked towards her destination, the same destination she had been walking to every Halloween for years. She passed a particularly decorated house. She noticed some teenagers sitting on the porch with a bowl of candy. She waved at them. The kids waved back and complimented her on her gruesome costume. They loved the accuracy of the time period of her dress and the way she held her neck at such an uncomfortable looking angle. Caroline was delighted that they noticed such detail. Most people just smile and nod at her. She asked them if they would like to come with her to a party that she was headed to. With only a few questions, Caroline had convinced the children to come with her. As they started walking together, Caroline's stomach began to growl. As they walked towards their destination, the teenagers and Caroline made pleasant conversation. They spoke about how much they all loved Halloween and were able to dress up as whoever they wanted to be for one night. Caroline explained that she felt Halloween was the opposite. She felt that for one night she could truly be herself and be recognized for who she actually was. While their conversation went on, the group made their way down many streets, eventually making their way to the older side of town. One of the teenagers asked where the party was being held. Caroline replied,
"It's not much farther."
Caroline rounded the last corner and walked towards their final destination, but she walked alone. The teenagers had stopped at the corner of the street, staring at Caroline and the view from the road. They all began to complain that they were not going through those gates. There was no way they were going to set foot in a cemetery at night, let alone on Halloween. Caroline goaded them.
"Seriously, guys, it's just a graveyard. Are you gonna come, or are you gonna be a bunch of chickens?"
She tried to coax them to enter the gates by promising that the party in the cemetery is the best Halloween party every year, and it's such an appropriate setting. One of the teenagers agreed to come with her, claiming that he didn't believe that there was anything to be afraid of in a cemetery. Caroline smiled. One after another, the teenagers passed through the gates, finally following her down the dirt path in between the graves. They read the tombstones as they passed. A cold fog began to roll in front of them. They all started to feel shivery. They were almost there. Caroline's stomach growled loudly. Her smile widened with each step. As they peaked the last hill in the cemetery, she saw it, her final destination, the mausoleum. She walked towards the open door, pitch black on the inside. The teens halted before she reached the doorframe. They all refused to enter the building, asking where all the other party guests were and why it was so dark if there was supposed to be a party in there. Caroline giggled as she told them that there was a secret door in the building and that the party was actually underneath the mausoleum. They were all so apprehensive, but not wanting to look like they were chicken, they followed Caroline into the darkness. The only light in the small room was coming from the moon in the doorway. The teenagers searched around for a light switch, but before they could find one, the doors shut. They all screamed as the loud bang echoed in the room. The only sound that they could hear in the darkness was the sound of Caroline's stomach growling. Caroline began to laugh maniacally. They begged her to be let out, to escape this place, but Caroline refused. Before the teenagers could think to ask another question or beg for their freedom, Caroline pounced and tore into their flesh. As fast as lightning, she severed each of their heads from their bodies, blood splashing all over the room. As she feasted on one teenager, the other ghouls began to rise from their slumber and make their way out of their coffins. They feasted as a family until the last morsel was gone. Now, with full bellies, the others made their way back into their coffins to sleep once more. Caroline left the mausoleum covered in blood. As she made her way back to the streets, a group of young adults stopped her to compliment her on her gruesome costume. Her stomach growled as she asked them if they wanted to accompany her to the best Halloween party ever.
Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed these 2 Halloween dark tales. If something terrifying's ever happened to you on Halloween, I'd love to hear about it in the comments section below. Also, I was going to point out that the best way to watch these dark tales is in the dark with headphones on. It really adds to the creepiness. So yeah, I know some of you are working or driving and you can't really watch it, so please don't watch the videos while you're driving. You can listen all you want, but you know what I mean. I just don't want you to have a wreck. Anyways, I digress. So thanks a bunch, and until we meet again, in the darkest depths of Extinction
18.